Are you waiting for Plasma 6? Well, you're gonna have to wait a little bit longer because we have the release date and more details about the features, and it's not happening before early 2024. This week we also have some news about the new Ubuntu App Center, which still doesn't support installing Debian packages, and we also have GNOME 45 breaking all extensions for real this time. For real, like how really good this segue to our sponsor is. This video is sponsored by Thunderbird. Most of you probably know about it, but for those who don't, it's an all-in-one suite that handles email, calendar, contacts, tasks, RSS feeds, and chats. Thunderbird recently received a giant update with a full redesign of the app that makes it easier than ever to set up your accounts and to be productive. The interface is very customizable with multiple choices for interface density, view modes, panels, and the ability to place any button you need in the top bar. After this update, Thunderbird is now my email and calendar client of choice. Also, it's fully open source, it's free of charge, and it's available for any Linux distribution, Windows, and macOS. So, whether you used Thunderbird in the past or not, click the link in the description below and give the new release a try. You will not regret it. So, if you're a KDE user, you will be glad to know that Plasma 6 finally has a release date, but you might be less glad to know that it is planned for February 2024, which might seem far into the future, but it is probably best to ensure that this is the best version of KDE that it can be. The exact day isn't set yet, but this leaves them 5 more months to finish the work, which is progressing nicely. They've switched some components for newer Kirigami ones, which should reduce code duplication, and thus should also make things more stable and easier to develop. They also have included all the recent work, like custom reordering of KRunner results, double-click and tap-to-click by default, better icon theme support, and more. The list of currently open issues is also going down, with 75 open at the time I'm recording this, and only 15 of these are big blocking issues. There are still some features that they want to include, but that they haven't started on yet, so they might not make it into Plasma 6's initial version. And this includes bringing SDDM into the KDE project list, accentuating the color of the title bars using your accent color, removing some duplicated notification settings, and splitting the brightness and battery widgets into separate entities. The KDE Framework 6 and KDE Gear compilation using Qt 6 and the framework's version 6 will also see their release in February, with the first alpha in November, betas and release candidates until January, and a release that's at the same time as the Plasma 6 desktop. Other changes include added support for the accent color standard, which will also land in KDE 5.27. There's also more work to improve cursor responsiveness and power usage for Plasma 6, and 5.27 will also get some fixes to high DPI support. Personally, I don't really have an issue with them taking all the time they need to make sure that it's as polished and as stable as it can be. 5.27 is a pretty good place to be stuck on for a few months, unless you're using Wayland and Nvidia, because I started doing that on a new laptop for a new project, and it is not good. But X11 works really well on it. Now, Ubuntu 23.10 is right around the corner, and it got its new App Store, replacing their old fork of GNOME software that was really worse than the original application. The new front end is built with Flutter, like their recent new installer. It's called App Center, and it looks like it's definitely better optimized than its predecessor, feeling more responsive and using less RAM, according to OMG Ubuntu. I must say the app looks good in screenshots, with a simple UI, a sidebar with categories, nicely laid out app pages, and big screenshots, with the ability to view them in a larger format. It also handles snap updates, it lets you see a list of your installed snap apps, and of course it lets you perform installs and uninstalls. Now, the big drawback with this one is that you can't find any app from the Ubuntu repos. Anything that is provided as a deb doesn't show up. Pretty much like what Elementary OS does in their store, also called App Center. There is a pull request to add that feature back in, so maybe it's just temporary. But seeing as this new store is based on a community project that does support deb installs out of the box, it feels a bit intentional to not have that included. Of course, this new store doesn't support Flatpak and probably never will, which means that if you want to add that to Ubuntu and get a graphical app store for Flatpaks, you will have two stores, GNOME software for Flatpaks and the Ubuntu App Center for snaps. And I'm not sure how I feel about this thing. Like, sure, it looks like a good app, and if they do end up adding back support for Debian packaged applications, then it's all good. But if they leave that out, I think it's a big mistake. It was one on Elementary OS. Admittedly, it's a smaller one on Ubuntu because they have more snaps than Elementary OS has dedicated apps, but you're still missing out on a lot. And forcing users to use snaps or to use the command line to install applications, not good. Now, GNOME 45 will be released this month, in about 2 weeks, but while it does look like it's going to be a very solid release, it also comes with one big drawback. It's going to break every single extension. Not like the meme that GNOME always breaks all extensions. No, for real, they're intentionally breaking all extensions. GNOME 45 changed how they handle JavaScript imports, which is how extensions work. You import new JavaScript code to change the JavaScript code of the GNOME shell. As GNOME moves to standard JavaScript modules, or ESM, extension developers will need to port their extensions or they will not work at all. The GNOME team released a porting guide to explain the new syntax that has to be used, and it doesn't look like it's a huge amount of work, although, as always, some extensions will be more affected than others. Developers will also have to maintain two versions of their extensions, one for GNOME 44 and earlier, and one for GNOME 45, and they will have to upload two versions of these extensions on the GNOME portal. And that's a pretty big bummer, because I'm pretty sure a lot of extensions will not have been ported in 2 weeks when GNOME 45 actually releases, and also extension developers, if they really want to support every single GNOME user, will have to keep backporting bug fixes and new features to the old version of the extension and develop them on the new one, which is some extra work that I don't really think they wanted. Now, the Linux performance and driver train keeps going this week as well, with first some updates to the Intel Arc GPU drivers. The latest patches should improve Vulkan performance for all Intel Arc users, notably for games like Dota 2, Strange Brigade, Borderlands 3, or Formula 122. All these patches will make it into Mesa 23.3, so they should land pretty soon. The new Intel Xe graphics driver still hasn't made it into the current cycle for the kernel 6.6, but when it drops, it should also bring much better performance for these integrated GPUs than the aging i915 drivers. We also have some updates to the XPad driver for game controllers that will land in the kernel 6.6. This should improve support for Xbox-like third-party controllers to make them work like a 360 pad, basically. As per performance improvements, we have some optimizations for certain AMD CPUs that don't have ERMS, which is a feature that allows to move memory around more efficiently. Some recent AMD CPUs do not have access to this, and so there's a patch for the kernel 6.6 to improve performance for these CPUs, up to 14% faster memory-related operations. And as always, when you're using Linux as the base for your operating system, with each update you get better performance, better stability, better battery life. It's just good, and you can't say that of most other operating systems and their kernels. Now, it looks like the EU will be backing off when trying to impose a unified messaging standard. iMessage is not listed as a gatekeeper for the purposes of the new law on interoperability that would have made Apple obligated to open up iMessage to work properly with other phone operating systems through the RCS standard. Instead, the EU is launching an investigation into iMessage's market share to see if it fits the definition of a gatekeeper under that law. And Apple is still listed as a gatekeeper for iOS, for Safari, and for the App Store, along with Google, Meta, or Microsoft with a lot of their products. The argument for iMessage is that it's too small in the EU and it doesn't really control the messaging space like it can do in other countries, like the US, for example. The investigation will last for 5 months and determine whether it should be included as a core platform service or not. If the EU decided that it does indeed qualify, Apple will have until August 2024 to make iMessage compatible with RCS, which would actually be really good to make sure communications are entirely interoperable when it comes to text messages. And Apple is still affected by a bunch of relatively recent EU laws, like they're gonna have to use USB-C and not the awful Lightning, which is a great thing. They're gonna have to offer user-serviceable batteries in all their devices, which also really good. But I really wish RCS would become the universal standard so everyone can just communicate whatever the app with all the features that they want. It's just a standard, it's better. And on the topic of privacy, we have the latest Google novelty landing in all Chrome browsers, the so-called Privacy Sandbox. This is Google's attempt at replacing third-party cookies, since these are now pretty useless for ads and tracking and they're generally blocked everywhere. As a matter of fact, third-party cookies will be entirely disabled by default in Chrome in 2024. So the Privacy Sandbox will now store ad topics instead. They will keep track of all websites you visited and sort them into categories. And all of this will happen locally in the browser and be stored on your device. And websites that want to display ads will only have access to the categories you're interested in to personalize the ads based on that. It will, of course, be accompanied by an ad measurement tool to let companies know what ads you clicked on and how well they're performing. And on paper, it's a really good change. Instead of being based on purely personal information and full-on tracking, it's much more toned down and it's limited to your local device, which should make it easier to block it if you don't like it. On the other hand, it's a mechanism that is browser-dependent, which means it gives Google extra control over the ad market and reinforces their quasi-monopoly on digital ads. If they decide they don't like the way other people want to do ads, they can refuse to implement these changes to this system. They could not really do that with cookies because that would break their own stuff. And obviously, anything that would make Google more powerful on the web browser side of things or on the internet in general should be looked at with a lot of suspicion and not greeted with applause. And let's finish this with the gaming news. Linux market share is still riding high at 3.18% on the desktop at the end of August, a nice big upwards trend since June. On the gaming side though, Linux saw a small drop back at 1.82%, but still higher than macOS, which sits at 1.57%. And these are small numbers, but they still put Linux in the second spot for the most popular PC operating system for gaming, which means that game developers will probably look at Linux instead of looking at porting their game to macOS, especially since porting your game to Linux with Proton is really easy compared to porting it to using Metal on macOS. In other news, Steam will now show better indicators for game controllers, notably for DualShock and DualSense. When looking at the controller icon in a games page, you will now see if the game supports PlayStation controllers, and how well they do that. Valve says that they're seeing a big increase in PC gamers using controllers, with about 27% of people who do use a controller using a PlayStation controller. And I would personally also use one if games actually displayed the PlayStation symbols inside of their games, because I really like the DualSense, but when a game asks me to press X, I'm gonna press X, not square. So if you don't display PlayStation symbols, I will stick to the Xbox controller. And we also have some interesting possibilities for Valve hardware. Recent additions to the Linux kernel 6.6 indicate support for devices from Valve, codenamed Galileo and Sephiroth. We don't know what they are yet, but they're added under Jupyter devices, this being the codename for SteamOS. Since the current system on a chip on the Steam Deck is codenamed Aerith, which is another Final Fantasy character, and as this specific character was brutally killed by another character called Sephiroth, it's not too unlikely that Sephiroth might actually be a new SoC for the Steam Deck, either a refresh or a new device entirely. And it's all speculation, but what's certain is that Valve has more hardware planned. Whether they are small refreshes of the deck or entirely new devices, what's certain is that they're gonna run SteamOS. And what's certain is that if you want to run Linux, then you should take a look at our sponsor. Tuxedo. They make laptops and desktops that run Linux out of the box. All the hardware they use is picked specifically because it runs really well under Linux. And if there are some kinks or quirks to iron out, they generally submit patches upstream so everyone can benefit from these fixes, even other computer manufacturers. They're based in Germany, but they ship to most countries in the world, and they do have a big range of devices that should cover every price point and every need. Whether you're looking for a laptop, a NUC, a tower, whether you're looking for something for gaming or just office work, they have it all. All the devices are very customizable in terms of the components you put inside. You can also have your own logo on the lid of your laptop, you can pick a custom keyboard layout, and also all the laptops can be opened, repaired, and upgraded. So, if you're looking for a new computer and you want to run Linux and you want to support Linux's development, click the link in the description below and get yourself a Tuxedo PC. They're really good. So, thanks everyone for watching the video. You know what to do. Like, subscribe, turn on notifications, write a comment, everything that can help with the all-seeing eye of YouTube. And if you didn't like the video, there's always that thumbs down button. And if you really like the channel, there are plenty of links in the description of the video to help support it. So, thanks for watching, and I guess you'll see me in the next one. Bye!